On the morning of June 26, 2025, Melissa Casias appeared to be living an ordinary life. She was a mother, an employee at one of America's most important scientific institutions, and by all accounts she was preparing for what should have been another normal day. But before the day was over, Melissa Casias would disappear. No warning, no explanation, no goodbye. Her phone was left behind, her purse remained untouched, and despite extensive searches, investigators could not find her. For nearly a year, her family lived in a nightmare of uncertainty. Then, in 2026, a discovery deep inside a New Mexico forest would change everything. But even today, one question remains unanswered. What really happened to Melissa Casias? This is the story of a disappearance that shocked New Mexico and continues to raise troubling questions. Before she became the center of a major missing persons investigation, Melissa Casias was known primarily as a devoted mother and hardworking professional. She worked as an administrative assistant at Los Alamos National Laboratory. For decades, Los Alamos has been one of the most significant scientific facilities in the United States. The laboratory has played a major role in American research, national security, and scientific advancement. But Melissa's life wasn't defined by the institution where she worked. To family and friends, she was known for her dedication to her children. People who knew her described a woman deeply involved in her family's life and future. Nothing in the days leading up to her disappearance suggested she was about to vanish, at least not at first glance. But as investigators would later discover, the final hours before she disappeared contained several unusual details. Details that continue to fuel questions today. June 26th began like many other mornings. Melissa carried out routine activities and maintained contact with people around her. But as the day progressed, events began taking a strange turn. One of the last confirmed moments involving Melissa occurred after she reportedly delivered lunch to one of her daughters. At some point afterward, her behavior became increasingly difficult to explain. Investigators later learned that she left behind many of the personal items people normally take everywhere: her phone, her purse, other belongings, items that would typically remain close to someone planning to continue their day. Then came another unusual development. Melissa's vehicle was eventually located near State Road 518 in northern New Mexico. The location immediately became a focal point for investigators. Why was her vehicle there? Had she left voluntarily? Had someone else been involved? Authorities quickly launched a search effort. Ground teams combed the area. Volunteers joined the effort. Family members desperately searched for answers. But Melissa Casias seemed to have vanished. As days turned into weeks, concern intensified. Search teams expanded their efforts. Law enforcement agencies reviewed tips and witness accounts. Investigators attempted to reconstruct Melissa's final movements. Yet, despite extensive searching, no definitive answers emerged. Missing persons investigations often depend on digital evidence, phone records, financial transactions, surveillance footage, witness sightings. But even with modern technology, some disappearances remain incredibly difficult to solve. Melissa's case quickly became one of those mysteries. Months passed, then more months. The uncertainty weighed heavily on everyone involved. Family members faced an agonizing reality. Without evidence, they didn't know whether Melissa was alive, or whether something terrible had already happened. And with every passing day, hope became increasingly difficult to maintain. Before we continue, if you enjoy in-depth true crime documentaries built around verified facts and active investigations, consider subscribing, because the mystery surrounding Melissa Casias only becomes more complicated from here. As public interest grew, so did speculation. People searched for explanations. Some wondered whether Melissa may have left voluntarily. Others questioned whether foul play could have been involved. There were also discussions surrounding her employment at Los Alamos National Laboratory. However, investigators never publicly announced evidence linking her disappearance to her work. As a result, many theories remained exactly that, theories. Without evidence, speculation can quickly become misinformation, and investigators repeatedly emphasized the importance of focusing on verified facts. Yet the absence of answers created a vacuum, one that rumors often rush to fill. For Melissa's family, however, the focus remained unchanged. They wanted answers, not theories, not internet speculation, just answers. By the end of 2025, Melissa had been missing for months. The investigation remained active. Search efforts continued. Law enforcement continued reviewing information. Yet no major breakthrough emerged. For families of missing persons, uncertainty often becomes its own form of suffering. There is no closure, no definitive explanation, only endless possibilities. Every phone call becomes significant. Every reported sighting creates hope, and every dead end creates disappointment. Melissa's family experienced all of it. Meanwhile, investigators remained committed to finding evidence capable of explaining what happened during those final hours. Then, nearly a year after her disappearance, everything changed. In May 2026, authorities made a significant discovery. Human remains were located within Carson National Forest. The discovery immediately triggered a new phase of the investigation. Forensic specialists became involved. Evidence was collected. The area was carefully examined. Then came confirmation. The remains belonged to Melissa Casias.
Begin with breaking news.
New Mexico State Police have identified remains found last night as the missing woman Melissa Casias.
The news brought an end to one mystery, but it created another. Because identifying the remains was only the beginning. Investigators still needed to determine exactly what had happened. How had Melissa ended up there? What occurred during the months she remained missing? And perhaps, most importantly, was another person involved? A handgun was reportedly found near the remains. The discovery immediately raised additional questions. But investigators remained cautious. At that stage, authorities had not publicly determined an official cause or manner of death. And that distinction remains critically important. Quick question. What part of this case do you find most puzzling so far? The abandoned belongings, the location of the vehicle, or the discovery in the forest? Let me know in the comments. Cases like Melissa Casias often generate intense public discussion. People naturally search for explanations, but responsible investigations rely on evidence, not assumptions. At the time of this documentary, authorities continue working to determine exactly what happened. Several possibilities have been discussed publicly. However, no official conclusion has been announced. This means the most important question remains unresolved. What happened after Melissa left her vehicle? Without definitive forensic findings, investigators must continue carefully evaluating every possibility. And until those findings are released, many of the most important questions remain unanswered. Regardless of how the investigation ultimately concludes, one reality remains unchanged. A family spent nearly a year searching for a loved one. A community rallied behind that search. And a disappearance transformed into a tragedy. Cases like this remind us how quickly ordinary lives can change. One day, everything appears normal. The next, an entire family is searching for answers. For Melissa's loved ones, the investigation is not simply a news story. It is deeply personal, and the search for truth continues. The story of Melissa Casias remains unfinished. Investigators have recovered her remains. But many critical questions remain. What happened after she disappeared? How did she end up in Carson National Forest? And what conclusions will investigators ultimately reach? For now, the case stands as a reminder that some mysteries do not end when a person is found. Sometimes that is when the hardest questions begin. If you've made it this far, let me know where you're watching from. And if there is another case you'd like covered in a future documentary, leave it below. As new developments emerge in the Melissa Casias investigation, the search for answers continues, and so does the story.